Do you know what happens when you die in a place where no one remembers your name? In the spring of 1931, a construction crew near a forgotten Louisiana swamp broke through the earth and found something that should have stayed buried. 42 small coffins, all unmarked, all sealed with pitch and wire. And when they opened the one that tree roots had already violated, they discovered something that made grown men turn away in horror. The bones of children, dozens of them, some missing skulls, others bearing holes that could only have been made by surgical tools. 7 of them showed signs of trepanation, deliberate drilling into living bone. Within 48 hours, federal agents descended on the site. Every photograph was confiscated. Every worker was paid to sign non-disclosure agreements, and the discovery that should have made national headlines simply vanished. No newspaper ever reported it. No investigation was ever conducted. No one was ever charged. To the rest of the world, a place called St. Aurelia Home for Children never existed, but it did exist. And what happened there, behind walls of silence and beneath a chapel built on cursed ground, is a story that will make you question everything you think you know about faith, innocence, and the dark spaces between life and death. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore. This is the documented history of an orphanage where children were taught to separate their souls from their bodies, where a rogue priest conducted rituals that had no name in any known religion, where kids who arrived with names left as numbers, if they left at all. And at the center of it all was a chamber deep underground, a place called the Sanctum Lucidum, the Chamber of Light, where something ancient and hungry waited in the dark, breathing through the mouths of abandoned children. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is real. Every document, every testimony, every horrifying detail, and I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll understand why some places should never be remembered. Let's go back to where it all began. November 2nd, 1859, the Day of the Dead. The man who built St. Aurelia arrived in Louisiana under a cloud of whispers. His name was Father Jean-Baptiste Duval, and he came from northern France carrying 2 things: a letter claiming he was a priest, and enough money to buy 18 acres of isolated swampland that locals called Le Bouet Sacré, the sacred mud. No diocese in Europe could verify his ordination. Some said he'd fled religious persecution. Others whispered darker truths, that he'd been expelled from the church for teachings that crossed into heresy. But in Louisiana, where Catholicism blended with Creole mysticism and French superstition, nobody asked too many questions, especially when a man came bearing gold. Duval built his orphanage quickly, too quickly. By mid-1860, a modest chapel stood at the property's heart, flanked by 2 dormitories, a separate healing house, and a bell tower so tall it seemed grotesque for such a small congregation. But here's the thing, there was no congregation, only children. They came from all over: New Orleans orphan wards, war-torn plantations, river towns as far north as Natchez. Most were poor, mixed race, disfigured or simply forgotten. Duval had one requirement, documented in an 1862 letter: the child must be unnamed by the world, without earthly attachments, open to divine imprint. Translation: no one to miss them. The women who assisted him were even stranger. They called themselves the Sisters of the Silent Veil, an order that appears in no official Catholic registry. Witnesses describe them as unnaturally tall, with pale complexions and eyes that didn't blink enough. They wore jet black habits, stitched with a white symbol, a circle broken by a single vertical line. No one could explain what it meant. They spoke rarely, and when they did, it was often in a language that wasn't English or French. Some who heard it said it sounded like breathing backward. By 1865, over 60 children had passed through St. Aurelia's gates. Fewer than half were ever heard from again. Now, you might think someone would notice, a government inspector, a concerned neighbor, anyone, and someone did try. In 1871, a traveling inspector from the Louisiana Office of Public Welfare attempted to audit the facility. He was turned away at the gate by a tall woman who identified herself only as Mother Seraphine. 2 weeks later, his report was quietly closed with a single notation: no irregularities noted, access restricted at discretion of ecclesiastical authority. From that point on, no further inspections were attempted. What was happening behind those gates? We know from Duval's recovered journal, a leather-bound book that wouldn't surface until 1974, that by 1866, something had changed. He wrote, "They say this land is unclean, but they are wrong. It is empty, and emptiness is the beginning of all holy work. The children do not resist the change. They pass through the dark and return lighter, lighter." What does that mean? Lighter in spirit, in weight, in soul. By 1870, Father Duval had stopped calling himself a priest. He called himself a vessel maker, and that's when the rituals began. Imagine you're a child at St. Aurelia. Maybe you're 7 years old, maybe younger. You've been told this place is a sanctuary, that God lives here, that you're safe. But every night after sundown, you're led into the chapel's lower hall for what Father Duval calls sessions of stillness. The room is dim, candles flicker, incense burns, not the sweet kind you'd recognize from church, but something bitter, made from roots pulled from the swamp. The sisters stand in a circle around you, their faces hidden behind black veils, chanting in that backward breathing language, and you're told to be still, to breathe when they breathe, to let go. Survivors, the few who escaped, described these sessions as exercises in the breath of division. Duval believed the soul wasn't a single, indivisible light. He thought it was made of fragments, like panes in a stained glass window, and he believed those fragments could be isolated, purified, or transferred. Children, he wrote, were ideal vessels. Their souls hadn't settled yet. They were open to refinement. One of his sermons, scribbled in the margins of a ledger, reads, "The body remembers pain, but the soul transcends it. By separating the fragment from its vessel, one may commune directly with the original light, and the child does not cling, the child releases." This theology, this doctrine of separation, became the foundation of everything that happened at St. Aurelia, and it required a special room. They called it the breathing room. One by one, children were brought down into a stone chamber beneath the chapel. They were instructed to lie still, to inhale a strange, bitter vapor, and to repeat phrases whispered by Sister Seraphine. They were told they would feel light leave their bodies, and many did. Survivors reported floating sensations, numbness, blurred memory, and afterward, silence, days without speech, gaps in time, a loss of color in their eyes. that their peers noticed immediately. One boy, Nathaniel Russo, 9 years old, collapsed after his third session. A newly arrived sister wrote in a letter, "He is unresponsive, breathing shallow, pupils fixed, yet no sign of fever or injury. The priest says it is a holy sleep and not to be disturbed." Nathaniel was never seen again. By 1875, at least 22 children had vanished from the records. No graves were ever marked, no funerals held. When a local priest dared to visit unannounced and asked where the children had gone, Duval replied, "God does not account for the dust in his wind. He only collects what rises." And the church, they took no further action. But here's where it gets worse, because we're not just talking about missing children anymore. We're talking about what happened to their souls. In 1968, 72 years after St. Aurelia burned to the ground, a leather-bound journal surfaced at a rare book auction in Montreal. It was labeled only as Journal Religio, 1870s. Inside were 9 months of entries written by a 22-year-old novice named Sister Emily Fournier, sent from Quebec to assist with missionary work at a children's refuge in rural Louisiana. She had no idea what she was walking into. Her first entry, dated January 3, 1876, is full of hope. "The land is warm, though the sky hangs low with mist. The children seem shy but gentle. Father Duval walks, as if carrying invisible weight. The sisters here are unlike any I've seen. Tall, silent, eyes that do not blink enough." But by the end of that same month, the tone shifts. They speak in whispers at night. "The prayers are not Latin, I was taught, and the little ones, they do not laugh. When I tried to teach them a hymn from home, Sister Seraphine said it was forbidden to muddy their frequency." Muddy their frequency. What does that mean? Sister Emily began noticing children being taken from their dormitories at odd hours, always barefoot, always silent. She mentions the breathing room for the first time on February 12, noting that it smells of vinegar, burnt herbs, and something else, sweet but wrong. On March 7th, she writes about a girl named Rose, maybe 10 years old, who clung to her more than the others. Rose says she used to have a brother. Now she says she can't remember his face. She says sometimes she dreams of standing in a black circle while her body is lying down somewhere far away. I tried to comfort her. She only stared past me and asked, "Which Rose am I now? Which Rose am I now?" Think about that question. What would cause a child to ask that? From that point on, Sister Emily's entries grow frantic. She questions whether she's dreaming, whether the other sisters are watching her too closely. She describes hearing voices behind the chapel walls. One night she writes, "I woke to find all the children standing beside their beds, not moving, not blinking, just standing. When I asked what was wrong, one boy said, 'We are waiting for the next breath.'" She begged Duval to release her from service. He refused, telling her, "You were chosen because your fear is clean. It will not pollute the work." Her final entry is dated September 1, 1876. "Tonight, the sisters will breathe with the children. I was told to join, but I have buried this journal beneath the floorboard of the southern dormitory. If I do not return to write again, whoever finds this, please do not let them build again upon this soil." Sister Emily Fournier was never seen again. No death certificate, no transfer, no mention in any convent registry after 1876. But her handwriting, verified by forensic experts, remains one of the only first-hand accounts from inside St. Aurelia, and it tells us what records won't, that whatever was happening in the breathing room was not salvation, it was extraction. Now, let's talk about what happened to the children who didn't escape between 1877 and 1882. 31 children were officially recorded as adopted from St. Aurelia. Neat little notations in the ledger. Adopted, released to private guardianship. But when a researcher in the 20th century cross-referenced these entries with census data and adoption logs, she found something horrifying. None of the adoptions could be verified. No guardian names, no home addresses, no follow-up reports. Most adoption forms were signed only with initials, and several bore the same handwriting, later matched to Sister Seraphine. The children had no known relatives, no one to ask questions, no one to miss them. They disappeared on paper and in life. One county clerk named Eleanor Tisdale made an inquiry in 1883, noting the unusual frequency of untraceable guardianship filings from St. Aurelia. Her note, preserved in parish records, reads, "It is not that they vanish entirely, it is that they vanish perfectly, as if their existence was an interruption in something smoother." A month later, Eleanor Tisdale went missing on her way home from work. Her body was never recovered. Her bicycle was found upright, wheels still spinning, just a quarter-mile from the path to Hallamere Creek. Even stranger than the disappearances was the pattern. Whenever Duval's journal mentioned a major breathing convergence, a night when many children participated in ritual sessions, the orphanage's registry would reflect a sudden cluster of adoptions days later. March 19, 1878. 7 children present for breath unification. March 22, 1878. 6 adoption entries logged. October 4, 1880. 11 taken to stillness for refinement. October 7, 1880. 10 guardianship terminations filed. They left the dormitories. They never came back, and no one ever came looking. But one boy did escape. In 1881, a 12-year-old named Daniel S. was discovered nearly feral in a fishing village 2 counties away. He refused to speak at first. After several weeks, he began to draw circles, spirals, symbols, and then, on one page, a group of small figures standing in a ring, surrounded by women in black veils. Over their heads, he scrawled 3 crooked words in blocky, uneven letters. "We were breath." Daniel disappeared again the following winter from the foster home that had taken him in. His drawings were all that remained. So, what was actually underneath that chapel? In 1939, a geological survey team was dispatched to the ruins of St. Aurelia to test foundation viability. The above-ground structure had long since collapsed, but beneath the old chapel, something remained. 6 feet below the surface, they unearthed a subterranean complex, far more sophisticated than anyone anticipated. This wasn't a storage cellar, it was a machine. A narrow staircase led downward into a cruciform corridor, each wing ending in a sealed alcove. The walls were lined with limestone bricks carved with symbols, circles intersected by vertical lines, rows of dots, childlike eyes and open mouths exhaling. At the heart of the complex was a chamber labeled in brass inlay, Sanctum Lucidum, the chamber of light. The irony was suffocating. There were no windows, no light fixtures, only hooks for oil lanterns long gone, and a discolored dark stain spiraling across the stone floor. That stain, it tested positive for human hemoglobin. The floor was an elaborate mosaic of black and white tile, arranged in a concentric spiral. At the center sat a small circular platform, just 30 inches in diameter, barely wide enough for a child to kneel. Around the edges of the chamber, 5 shallow depressions had been carved directly into the stone, each roughly the size of a child's body. Faint scratch marks lined their edges. When the surveyors tried to document the site, their photographs came back distorted, blurred at the edges, darkened at the corners. One technician reported developing an image that showed 6 children standing in the chamber, even though no one had been present during the exposure. The film was confiscated by state officials within 48 hours. A memo later uncovered through a FOIA request noted, "This site is to be deemed culturally sensitive and spiritually hazardous. No further excavation recommended." But 2 researchers, a structural anthropologist and a Jesuit archivist, conducted a private follow-up. They found inscriptions near the base of the platform, etched faintly in Latin, "Spiritus dividuor, sub silentio." The spirit is divided beneath silence, and beneath that, a final line in French, nearly illegible. La bouche de l'enfant ouvre la porte. Let the child's mouth open the door. What door? To where? The state sealed the site within days. The ruins were reburied, but the records remain, and the shape of that room, its scale, its symbols, its stains, tells us what was never meant to be spoken aloud, that whatever Father Duval built beneath his chapel was not a sanctuary, it was a doorway. Now, I need you to hear something. In 1947, a social worker at a retirement home in Arkansas noticed an unusual intake form for a new resident named Alma Costini, alias No Known Family, speaks fluent French. History of nightmares. For nearly a year, Alma kept to herself. She rarely spoke, recoiled at the sound of bells, and was known to line her bedside with circles of salt taken from the cafeteria. Then, in the spring of 1948, shortly after her 71st birthday, she asked to speak with a priest. Instead, the home sent a nurse named Sister Lenora, who had a background in linguistics. Alma spoke to her for hours, switching between English and a rural dialect of French Canadian. What she said disturbed Sister Lenora so profoundly that she used her own savings to purchase a reel-to-reel recorder and returned the next day. The result was a 43-minute recording, now held in private archives. The voice on the tape is fragile, breathless, sometimes interrupted by the sound of weeping. We thought the breath was meant to lift us, to send our souls toward the light. That's what they said. That's what the sisters always said. But it wasn't light. It was a hole, a deep, deep hole. Alma recounts being brought to St. Aurelia in 1890 after fever claimed both her parents. She was 13, older than most, but still considered pliable by Duval standards. She speaks of the rituals, the strange meals, the nights of silence, and then she speaks of August 3, 1893. 17 of us. They said we had been chosen, that we had reached our final breath, that we were to become the wind that carries light. They were dressed in white, led by candlelight, through the back of the chapel, down into the sanctum lucidum. Each child was placed in one of the shallow stone depressions in the floor. The platform at the center was empty. Then Sister Seraphine began to chant. I don't remember the words, just the sound, like something underwater, trying to breathe up. One by one, the others stopped crying, stopped blinking. Some of them began to smile. At that point in the recording, Alma falls silent for nearly a minute. When she resumes, her voice is shaking. They told me to kneel in the center. I remember the tile, cold, sticky. They placed something behind my head, something metal. When the breath came, it was like falling inside out, like something else wanted in. But Alma didn't finish the ritual. Just as the chant reached its crescendo, one of the oil lanterns exploded. Maybe an accident, maybe something else. In the confusion, a portion of the chamber caught fire. Stone cracked, smoke filled the room. I ran. I didn't look back. I stepped over bodies. I stepped on arms. I heard someone call my name, but it wasn't in any voice I remembered. She ran barefoot through the swamp for 2 days. Eventually, found by a farmer, gave a false name, never spoke of Saint Aurelia again. Until that recording, Alma died a week later. Natural causes, no known family. The tape was nearly lost, almost thrown out, after Sister Lenora's departure, but someone kept it, and those 43 minutes remain one of the only spoken eyewitness accounts of the final ritual breath at St. Aurelia. 17 children entered that chamber. Only one voice returned. Now here's the part that changes everything. The fire that destroyed St. Aurelia on August 3, 1893, was never formally investigated. According to weather records, lightning storms passed through the area that night. The following morning, residents of a nearby river town reported seeing a thick column of black smoke rising above the swamp. When they arrived, they found silence. The chapel, dormitories, and bell tower had all been reduced to blackened husks. The ground near the main stair was still warm, but no bodies, no survivors, no signs of rescue. The only living thing present was a single black heron standing in the doorway of the ruined chapel, its wings outstretched, its eyes cloudy and white. Local Sheriff Thaddeus Darnell made one visit to the site before calling it a matter for the church. His report consisted of 2 sentences: structure lost to fire, no criminal suspicion. No criminal suspicion. Despite the complete disappearance of all 32 children registered as residents, and the entire Order of the Silent Veil, no funerals were held, no search parties formed, no mass grave dug, but something was buried. Years later, a researcher discovered a heavily redacted letter in the archives of the Diocese of Lafayette, written in an unsteady hand, dated August 8, 1893. There are things fire was never meant to cleanse. We have locked the door. We have taken the key. Let the earth hold what the breath could not. Do not knock on a door where the blood is still warm. And then, almost by unspoken agreement, Saint Aurelia was forgotten. Maps from 1894 removed its name. The land was quietly sold in parcels, none of which were ever successfully developed. Surveyors spoke of broken equipment, missing tools, and a pressure in the air like breathing inside someone else's lungs. By 1900, the place was referred to only in whispers as Lac des Cendres, the cradle of ash. But here's what no one knew. Until 1974, the journal of Father Jean-Baptiste Duval, presumed lost in the fire, surfaced in a misfiled box at a library in Paris. Inside were entries spanning from 1858 to 1893. Early passages are meditative, even poetic. Duval speaks of emptiness in children, and his belief that abandonment creates spiritual permeability. But as the years progress, the tone shifts. Pages become filled with diagrams, circles within circles, annotated sketches of skulls, lungs, and what appears to be a glass bowl filled with breath. He begins referencing a force beyond theology, a presence he names only once, l'animé, the nameless one. In a passage dated June 3, 1879, Duval writes, "We do not summon it, we allow it. It seeks vessels, and we offer the broken ones, the ones no longer claimed by earth or blood. They are willing, most of them." He becomes obsessed with separation, the idea that identity is layered, that beneath the soul lies the root of memory, and beneath memory lies a gate. What lies beyond that gate is never fully described, only alluded to. It has no shape, only hunger. It whispers in exhale. It taught the sisters their silence. The most chilling entries come from 1893, the final weeks before the fire. Duval writes of a convergence ritual, one he claims was not of his invention, but was shown to him during his own breath cleaving. He speaks of 17 children, specially prepared, one vessel to kneel in the center. And then for the first time Duval shows fear. There is something wrong. The children do not return from stillness. As before, they speak in unity. Their eyes reflect one another. I no longer hear the voice I knew, only the echo. In his final entry, dated August 1, 1893, he writes, "I built the gate, I opened it, but now it breathes on its own. I cannot close what has never needed hinges." Then, nothing. When historian Lucien Martel attempted to publish excerpts, the Jesuit archive intervened, claiming spiritual blasphemy and risk of inciting occult inquiry. But a single copy made its way into the private collection of a religious historian in Louisiana, a man named Dr. Ellery Voss, and in 1991, he got his chance to test Duval's claims against the earth itself. In 1991, the Department of Anthropology at Tulane University launched a civilian-sponsored excavation of historical religious sites in Louisiana. St. Aurelia was chosen not for its notoriety. By then, few even remembered the name, but for its complete absence of documentation. Among the team was Dr. Ellery Voss, the man who had quietly acquired a copy of Duval's journal. He had waited nearly 20 years for this chance. By week 2, they'd unearthed the outer chapel ruins. By week 4, they reached the lower sanctum. Then came the discovery no one was prepared for. Behind the known structure of the Sanctum Lucidum, Voss detected what he believed to be a sealed chamber, its outline faint in ground-penetrating radar. It took 2 days to chip through the mortar. The final layer wasn't stone. It was vitrified ash bound together with crushed salt and human bone, a ritual seal. When the wall finally broke, what greeted them was a stillness that felt aware. The air inside was cold, dry, untouched. At the center of the chamber lay 5 child-sized depressions, arranged in a spiral. Each held a preserved body, small, pale, eyes open, pupils dilated, no signs of decay. Carbon dating would later suggest they were over 90 years old. and yet one researcher swore she saw one of the children blink. Beneath the center platform was a stone cavity, and inside it, a form, not a body, not a statue, something else, roughly the size of a child, curled in sleep. The object pulsed slowly, like something breathing through stone. It had no eyes, no skin, just a surface like stretched cloth over shifting bones, and it was warm to the touch. The team sealed the site within hours. Dr. Voss never published his findings. He resigned from Tulane 2 months later and disappeared from academic life altogether. But before he vanished, he sent a final message to the university's ethics board. It contained one sentence: "What we found was not of God, nor of this earth, nor of any mercy yet spoken by man." That chamber has never been reopened. No university has applied to excavate again, and when state officials attempted to rezone the area for development in 2003, a freak sinkhole swallowed the entire northern tract, including the chapel ruins. Geologists called it a fluke. Locals called it justice. So what does all of this mean? What really happened at St. Aurelia? Let me lay it out as clearly as the evidence allows. Father Jean-Baptiste Duval was not a priest. He was a practitioner of something older, something that predated Christianity, a belief system rooted in the manipulation of the soul itself. He believed that children, especially orphans, had souls that were unsettled, malleable, open to refinement. Through rituals involving forced stillness, inhalation of psychoactive vapors, and repetitive chanting in an unknown language, he attempted to separate fragments of their consciousness, what he called breath, from their physical bodies. His goal, based on his own writings, was not salvation, it was transfer. He believed he could isolate the purest fragments of a child's soul and offer them to something he called the Nameless One, a presence he claimed existed beyond theology, beyond death, and in return, that presence gave him something: knowledge, power, perhaps even extended life. The Sisters of the Silent Veil were not nuns, they were initiates, vessels themselves, women who had undergone the same process and had been hollowed out, spiritually lobotomized, to serve as conduits. The children who vanished from the records weren't adopted, they were consumed, not in body, but in essence. Their souls were fractured, extracted, transferred. What remained were shells, bodies that breathed, but didn't think, eyes that opened, but didn't see. And when those shells were no longer useful, they were buried beneath the chapel in unmarked coffins, or worse, preserved in sealed chambers as offerings. The fire of 1893 wasn't an accident, it was an intervention. Whether divine or desperate, someone or something decided that what was happening at St. Aurelia had gone too far. 17 children were prepared for the final convergence. One was meant to serve as the central vessel, the gate through which the Nameless One could fully enter the world. But Alma Costini escaped, and when she did, the ritual collapsed. The fire consumed the structure, the bodies were hidden, the records were destroyed, and the church, terrified of what it had allowed to happen under its watch, buried the truth. For over a century, St. Aurelia remained a whisper, a rumor, a cautionary tale told by grandmothers in Cajun parishes, until 1931, when construction workers dug too deep and found the coffins, until 1991, when Dr. Voss opened the sealed chamber and found the children still waiting, still preserved, still breathing. Today, the land where Saint Aurelia once stood is overgrown, inaccessible, and legally off-limits. No roads lead to it, no trails are marked. Even satellite imagery shows only dense canopy and swamp. But locals will tell you, if you ask the right ones in the right way, that on certain nights when the fog rolls in from Hellemere Creek, you can hear it, a sound like children singing, or maybe breathing, in unison. And if you're foolish enough to follow that sound, you'll find something waiting in the dark, not a ghost, not a memory, something that never left. Because here's the final, haunting truth. The gate Father Duval opened in 1893 was never closed. The fire destroyed the structure. The church buried the evidence. The government sealed the site. But the chamber beneath the chapel still exists. The depressions in the stone still hold their shapes. The platform at the center still waits. And somewhere in the dark, beneath layers of earth and ash and silence, something is still breathing, waiting for the next child to kneel, waiting for the next breath. If this story shocked you, if it made you question what we're taught about innocence, faith, and the things we're told to forget, then I need you to do something for me. Check the video on your screen right now. I believe it was made for you. Because some stories don't end, they just wait.